Hey, it's me again for Jason. Can you hear me, Jason?
Yeah, loud and clear.
Okay, I'm wondering if when the meeting gets going, can you do a visual pan on the people who were there and present, just so we have some idea?
Certainly, yeah,
there?
here. Can do right now.
Okay. Not so fast. Well, there's certainly a good turnout, eh?
Yes, there is. Thank goodness.
Ah, excellent. Well, it's a hot topic, as they say.
Okay.
All right, thank you, Jason.
You're welcome.
Is great. And if it gets much fuller, will you do it again at some point?
Sure.
Thank you. Bye.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you for bringing your interest, both here in person and online. Special thanks also to our guest speakers for taking time out of their Friday evening to share their knowledge and expertise with us. So this open house is part of an information gathering effort by local communities regarding the Zincton all-season resort proposal. Like the general public, local councils have been invited by the provincial government's Mountain Resorts branch to comment on that proposal. So this open house is part of our due diligence. Where are things right now? Just to recap for everyone. So currently, the government's Mountain Resorts branch is continuing to review the Zincton formal proposal. It's at the formal proposal stage, so-called. If approved,
Somebody's talking there.
the review of the formal proposal will inform an interim agreement decision. From interim agreement, the proposal would move forward into the final and most intensive stage of review and planning, which is called the master plan stage.
You're not muted there.
Sorry, Colin, could you ask people to mute their mics? It's getting a lot of background noise.
So can I ask everyone not muted if they would mind doing that? Thank you. So just to recap quickly. So from the interim agreement, the proposal moves forward into the final and most intensive stage of review and planning, which is called the master plan stage. So where we are right now is the current review of the formal proposal stage. The next step is for Mountain Resorts branch to continue to collate and review the comments and responses received from all stakeholders and local government on the formal proposal. So to quote from an email from MRB yesterday, that information will be provided to the proponent who in turn must address any potential issues and impact identified within the formal proposal. So this is where this evening comes in. Zincton had an open house recently and their proposal is on their website. So we have heard extensively from Zincton about the scope of the development. Now, Silverton Council is trying to ascertain any quote unquote potential issues and impacts that may arise for the village and the surrounding communities from the development. To that end, it's our good fortune tonight to have been able to persuade 3 guest speakers chosen to provide expertise and insight into areas of concern as expressed to council by residents. Mountain Resorts branch were invited but are unable to attend because of prior commitments, but they stand by to receive our comments and to answer any questions afterwards. So this is not a debate this evening. This is not a pro-con. It's not for and against. This is an information gathering session. And we have invited 3 people to represent those issues which residents have actually mentioned to us. These are all issues, areas that haven't really been covered by the proponent. So we haven't heard anything about those. Okay, I will introduce each speaker before they present. There will be a 5-minute question and answer after each speaker and a short question and answer session at the end of the evening also. We'll attempt to run a chat line also, so feel free to submit questions by text also. We'll try and get to as many questions as we can. And I would like to emphasize that each speaker is independent and has no affiliation to any organization. In particular, 2 of them stressed to me, they want to make that very clear. They have data that they can present. They are completely unbiased. But if we're interested in hearing what they have to say, then they'd be willing to share it. So they've all been chosen accordingly. So I think I'd like to begin with Michael Proctor. We have Michael, I think, ready to go. So Michael Proctor is a Kaslo-based independent biologist who has studied wildlife in this area since 1995. As the lead Canadian researcher on the Transborder Grizzly Bear Project, Michael has identified key linkage areas along Highway 3. He will present his data, which addresses wildlife presence and movement in the Zincton development area. So Michael, if you're online and ready, can I ask you to take over?
Yes, the host has to allow me to share my screen. It's been disabled. So whoever the host is, have them allow me to share my screen.
You should be good now, Michael.
All right, very good. Somebody under 30 can handle the high tech. Okay, do they see my screen now? Hang tight.
We see it.
Yes, your screen is showing, but it would be good to have a full screen view.
You should have now. Do you have it now?
Yes.
Okay, great. Thanks. So my name is Michael Proctor. As he said, I didn't pay attention to the introduction, so I'll give another one. Sorry, Colin. I'm going to talk about grizzly bears connectivity and ecological corridors to Selkirk Mountains and hopefully how it relates to the Zincton project. I'm going to just give you a little better feel of who I am because most of you don't know me. I'm an independent research scientist. I don't work for anybody. I don't work for the government. I'm not a consultant. I don't take an idea and try to prove it. I just work for the truth of whatever nature teaches me. I've been a researcher for 27 years on bears. I've run the Transborder Grizzly Bear Project. I'm funded by basically wildlife conservation or research organizations, not activist groups or advocacy groups. I've published all my work in peer-reviewed journals. I've got about 34 papers. They're a real pain in the ass, just in case you're wondering. They're very hard to actually get a published paper because the reviewers are so picky, even though it's not a perfect process. I helped initiate a project called Kootenai Connect, which is a little bit relevant here. It talks about bringing the idea of ecological quarters to the Kootenays, mainly to adapt to climate change. We'll get into that a little bit. I'm also the co-chair of the IUCN Bear Specialist Group. I work around the world, bears, conservation of 7 of the 8 bear species. But what I really do, my research has taken me out into the wild. So I've been radio calling bears for 15 years and collecting genetic samples, basically working in the wilderness. But I eventually learned, I'm a hard-headed guy, that if you really want to manage wildlife, you need to manage people. It's really not about you don't get to manage grizzly bears. You can't tell a grizzly bear what to do. So got to know a couple of moose, and they eventually taught me how to manage wildlife. But so then part of my career and a lot of work I do is managing people. I don't radio collar people. You don't have to be worried if you get hit by a dart in town. It's not me trying to radio collar you. But we work with the Conservation Officer Service to help them deal with conflict bears. So don't have to kill them. We work with farmers and ranchers to put up electric fences, but to solve problems with the people. But the really important point about the reason I brought this up is wildlife management and what happens to their nature. It really depends on us people, what we decide. Wildlife, they don't really have much say. So it's up to us. Excuse me, I haven't spoken much today. Probably one of the stupidest things I've ever done in my life was I started a PhD at 50. And that was pretty crazy, but this is sort of the downstream results of that. This is a picture of the shaded area is the distribution of grizzly bears, the remnant distribution that used to go to Mexico. And the human settled valleys are sort of fractured, that big, larger population, that habitat peninsula that comes down from northern BC and extends into the US into what I call a cracked windshield. Those fractures are our human settled valleys where the bears don't move through there very well. They try to move through, most of them get killed. Those are a lot of females get killed in those areas. And those small numbers are the population estimates within those populations. And if you're under 100, you probably won't last over the long haul unless you're reconnected to one of the larger populations. So I've got that 600 number there. It's nice to connect those smaller populations like the one we're going to talk about today, the 30 bears there. It's really important to reconnect them. So this is just a close-up of that same map with the Zincton proposal popped in the middle there. You can see it. And so then after I figured out this fragmentation pattern, being unemployed, I wanted to create some employment. So I decided to radio collar bears and try to solve that problem. So I put radio collars on bears, catch them in the wild for 15 years. And I got a mountain of data. I get a radio collar, gives me a location on a bear every 2 hours for 2 years. And eventually we really figure out what grizzly bears do. And what I did with all that data, several things, is I built a habitat map. So the dark green blobs are the best grizzly bear habitat in our region, built off 15, 20 years worth of data. And this is, of course, put on the study area here, or the region of consideration. But also what I did was understand the most important bear food, which really drives their whole system. It's like, what drives Vancouver on a Friday night? Probably beer and wine. What drives grizzly bears across our region? Huckleberries. It's their driving. It makes them grow and have a lot of kids, and it's what drives their population vitality. And so there it is with the Zincton proposal on it. You can see that the proposal is right in the middle of some of the better habitat we have around here, with full of huckleberries. And what I want to show you with this slide, and you can toggle back and forth between these two, is
No volume, hey?
the area.
There should be
south of
volume on the
Highway-
speakers. What is the problem with that?
The volume of, excuse me, somebody's talking in the background. The habitat south of Highway 31A is really a habitat
When I
peninsula
hit this,
surrounded
it
by
should hit speakers, but it doesn't.
lakes and the white human settlement there, you can see. So bears won't be crossing those lakes or much through that human settlement. We know that from all our research. So really the only way to connect that habitat peninsula to those 30 bears is across Highway 31 coming down from the north. It's really the only place, and you can see it's sort of right smack dab in the middle of the proposal area there. But let's just take a step back just a little bit for a second and get a sense of what's going on in North America, to get us like, who cares about those 30 bears? Who cares about that stupid little corridor? In the scope of North America, it can be pretty irrelevant, but in the scope of the grizzly bear story, it's pretty relevant. So this is the remnant population that used to go all the way down into Mexico. You can see has gone extinct, and now we have the darker red lines polygon where the bears are, and then we have a series of isolated populations. To be fair, this range contraction has stopped since about the 1970s, and we're holding our own with bears, but it's a very important line, and there are some conservation concerns with these isolated populations here. And resorts proposal is right there. So it's not just those 30 bears, it's a bigger story than that. And just to refresh back to those 30 bears there, you can see it within that broken windshield. It's kind of an important location. And I'm not sure if you can see it really well, but you can see I've drawn what I would, if somebody forced me to draw a grizzly bear corridor across that highway, that is what my professional opinion would draw based on a lot of data, mostly supported by peer-reviewed papers. So that's kind of what you get, I guess. And this is just a little same view, but I've superimposed the blobs of good grizzly bear habitat on that, just to give you a feel for the link between the corridor and grizzly bears, like everybody else, follow good habitat, and they go to the best places. And just give you a feel. And one of the reasons, sorry to drag you through all these maps, but I'm going to tell you a story, but I wanted to show you the story. If you see the evidence, the stuff, you kind of sort of tend to believe me a little bit more. So, hope that's true anyway. So now I'm going to spend a minute or two talking about grizzly bears and huckleberries. There's sort of some important ideas here. This the tenure area and all around there, sort of some really good huckleberry patches. But there's about 25% of all the huckleberry patches or huckleberry occurrence out there. You guys recreate and see huckleberries all the time, but a small portion of that is actually good enough for a grizzly bear to use. They got to have enough to, it's a big animal. They've got to have enough to make it worthwhile. And it turns out that I've already mentioned they underpin reproduction and density, but the important point is when they're in secure habitat and minimally disturbed areas. And we're just publishing a paper right now, working on it daily, where we show very clearly and very strongly that when huckleberry patches are not in secure habitat, they are not taken up by bears. They don't turn into that good reproduction and density of females. So the presence of a lot of roads and human disturbance changes the whole dynamic, and doesn't really work as well as we'd like. So I'm going to switch gears. I'm sorry to move along so quick. I've only got like 15 minutes, and we're going to just a final topic here about bears anyway is grizzly bears in the winter. What's the relationship with hibernation, and how does that affect things? So when bears are hibernating, they're very vulnerable. They can't avoid disturbance. They're 3/4 asleep. And so disturbance has a cost. Lighter disturbances can wake them up, increase their heart rates, have them move in the den and elevate their body temperatures. Not too horribly detrimental, but it can have a cost that could affect the amount of fat they store that they have for bring up their kids in the spring. But more serious disturbance can result in den abandonment, and you can get increases, cub loss about 10 times higher than just the regular cub loss rate. So den abandonment is a pretty serious cost to the reproductive and the fitness of the bears. And that disturbance can happen within a kilometer, but more so usually within 200 meters. But importantly, some of the papers show that even snowshoeing and skiing can cause bears to pop out of their den. And it's the irregular, unpredictable events that are more disturbing. If they can actually sometimes den near predictor noises. But I really like to confess and make it very clear that we have imperfect data on this issue. There's not really great, solid 100%. We know what's going on here. So just want to be honest about that. And, we don't really know what's the disturbance level of 100,000 people per winter for all that. You can draw your own conclusions. We don't have a perfect science to answer that question. The other aspect is den selection in the winter. Grizzly bears, where do they den? They den away from roads. We do have real good science on this. This is pretty clear. Many studies have shown basically the same thing. Away from roads and disturbance, remote, steep, high elevation, open conifer forest, near spring food, very important. And of course, this is Whitewater Valley, where we all recreate a little bit and go to watch bears. But this pretty much describes the upper portions of the tenure area. But so the point I want to make here is the area here is, I'm just here reporting what I found, but it's really good pre-hibernation, fat building habitat, putting that fat on so they can hibernate and bring up their kids next spring from huckleberries. And it's also great post-hibernation habitat. And what's really kind of cool, my collared bears actually take the shape of the larger huckleberry patches for their annual home ranges. So they move in and live in and among and around these huckleberry patches, particularly where they have good spring habitat as well. So a female's home spring, how do they disperse? How does connectivity happening? Female offspring move away from their mother, and they don't just run across a hallway, they actually overlap their mother's home range. And so it's a kind of a stepping stone to connect two populations. So then the next generation overlaps their mother, and so on. And so therefore, the connectivity really means that bears, females have to live in these corridors. It was sort of we didn't want that to be the case. It makes it a lot harder to manage for female connectivity. But corridors are not hallways that animals run through. You can see they just kind of move across there a little bit. They keep going like that. So just to kind of wind up the bear portion of this, this is a government decision. It's not up to me or anything. I pass on my data. It's and with people's input. The stated government goals is relative to grizzly bears. It's been renewed in 2016. That they want to ensure sustainable, genetically, demographically linked grizzly bear populations, and where appropriate, they want to restore connectivity, abundance, and distribution. What do you mean by where appropriate? They are not going to try to bring back bears to the Okanagan, but this area, it would be under the appropriate guise. So it's a stated government thing. So, this is where the rubber meets the road. I rarely do not like taking stands and come out and pro and against all these things. I just pass on my data, but I've been doing this for a long time. I'm 72. I'm going to throw out a slight skeptical opinion here. I admit to being skeptical. The resort will, with or without their summer only thing, will actually be able to minimize extensive human use and disturbance of these foraging habitats with their summer only corridor. I'm a bit skeptical, I have to say. I have to admit, been watching and working with the government for 25 years. They do not have a good record of limiting human access in our region for the benefit of grizzly bears. Whatever they say they're going to do, they haven't followed through real well. They do a little bit of it, but it hasn't been that well. This is not meant to criticize government. I work with government all the time. I share all my data with them. They generally do a pretty good job. I'm not highly critical. It's just meant to be honestly descriptive. You as the people need to understand what your government really is going to do and not. The beauty of being an independent and being 72, I don't really care what anybody thinks. I speak as clear as I see it. I'm going to spend another minute talking just about the ecological corridor nature of the area. I am not a wolverine biologist. I run everything I'm going to say by Doris Hoslitner, who is the region's premier and very good wolverine biologist. She's agreed with everything I'm going to say. This is a density model of grizzly bears built by the provincial carnivore biologist Mowat et al. And it shows the higher density and medium densities of wolverine. You can see sort of a similar situation with grizzly bears, where there's a little dense pocket down in the south of the Highway 3. We do not have data that predicts where these corridors might be, but all these yellow splotches are marmot habitat, their favorite food. That's what drives, if huckleberries drive grizzly bears, marmot drive wolverine. And they do disperse away from their mother in the winter. They are active all year round. And they do also avoid roads and human disturbances. The most predicted, what drives marmots are snow, marmots, what drives wolverine are snow, marmots, and avoidance of people. Just to get a little sense, they are disturbed by backcountry skiers. Krebs et al., the government higher up, used to be a wolverine biologist, published a paper and looked at it, and a new later paper by Heinemeyer has also showed some functional responses to backcountry recreation. I'm not a wolverine biologist. I can't get into it. It's just to show you that it's more than bears, what we're thinking about here. And really, Colin, the very last topic, I promise, is just to really cover the bookends of ecological corridors. We've gone from large mammals down to the smallest amphibians. Just to give you, I'm not a Western toad biologist, and I'm not going to go through all the pros and cons, but I want you to be aware that this is also a really an important area as an ecological corridor that contains a pretty regionally important amphibian species, which are in decline globally, a special concern in BC, very sensitive. They can move up to 7 kilometers from their breeding ponds. And these breeding ponds here in yellow are the regional, or the areas, very most important ones. They're the big nurseries that feed the surrounding area. The 7 kilometers is where the toadlets from the ponds go, but then their descendants and go feed the whole meta population in the area. A bit more of a close-up shows that that 7-kilometer span. So it's, it's a pretty big deal to be throwing in 100,000 people every winter into this place and whatever happens in the summer. And it's a real local migration from breeding ponds up to that upper elevation. It's really a little bit our wildebeest, our caribou, our salmon migrations at a much smaller scale. You can't see it in this picture. There's probably 10,000 little total that's getting ready to move out. And one of the bigger threats, of course, is trying to get across those highways, among other things. So I'm not going to go into that in a lot of detail, but just to say that it really is, the food webs, the movement of energy and biodiversity and the ecosystem function that comes from the full spectrum of species in here to connect the habitat peninsula south of the highway is pretty important. But just because part of it is part of our geography with all the lakes, and then part of where we all live in the valley bottoms. But anyway, it's an important ecological corridor. I hope I haven't bored you too much. And if you have some questions, I apologize for going over a couple minutes, but it's lots of topics. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Michael. That was an excellent presentation. I guess my first question might be, would you be willing to make some of your work available to the village so that they had that to consider?
Sure, you bet. Yes, you can have a copy of that talk. I can make a copy to keep, and I think I've sent some of that stuff into the Mountains branch just as I sort of feel that obligation. I hate being involved in these controversial topics, but I feel a responsibility. Society's invested in the time and money and my research, so part of my job is to pass it along.
Okay, thank you very much. So I'll open it to any questions from the audience here in Memorial Hall.
So I can't hear that. Maybe someone could repeat it.
We're just inviting questions in
Okay.
Memorial Hall. I'm not seeing any movement. I think people are a little, they're still trying to take in your presentation, I think. There's a lot of information there.
Yeah, I apologize. I do not give slow presentations. That's why if it's recorded, you could maybe go back and look at it again and slow down and look at the maps. And I tried to leave the text on there so then people could understand the flow of ideas. I'm not known for my slow presentations, sorry.
So it looks like we have one question from Councillor Main.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for the presentation. Obviously, this is sensitive habitat and the development would have an impact on it. And I'm wondering if I'll come over to the other mic.
I can hear you real well, but yeah.
I'm wondering if you feel there are any things that can be done to ameliorate the impact of the development. If the development is approved to go ahead, are there things that could be done to minimize the impact, particularly on grizzly bears, but also on wolverine and toads? Thanks.
That's a tough question, and I have not. I have to admit the original response of the proponent was to develop a corridor, or to have a corridor. It's not really their land to create the corridor on. That's why I was sort of taking it back to the government. It's hard to mitigate 100,000 people, and then what happens in the summer, and then what happens downstream when it's sold to the next guy, and what they do. Those things have a way of doing so. I don't have a perfect list for you for that. I don't have a really good answer. Like I say, a non-use in the summer is a really big deal, but it really, in my mind, it's not necessarily enough. The winter denning is really going to have an impact, and it's not just this resort proposal. It's also the cumulative effects of other 10-year applications on there and the cumulative effects. Bears do not need no disturbance. Let's be very clear. They can do fine and they do well with lots of disturbance. It just comes a point when there's too much disturbance. And you know, maybe I haven't spent a ton of time itemizing what exactly could you do, or if you could do. First of all, you have to answer, can you ameliorate it with something or can't you? So that's can be a binary answer. And then if you think you could, what would you do? I don't have a perfect answer for you. I'm sorry.
Okay, thank you very much.
I do think it'll be a challenge. You know, it's hard to have that many people at some point. You know, I do think it would be a challenge to do it, and it may not even be. It's possible that you can't just ameliorate it. I know we like to do things and say, oh well, we'll fix it, but I think if you look at my map of the fragmentation across the whole region, what my wife likes to keep telling me, it's death by 1,000 cuts. It's not just the cut here. It's all the other cuts across that whole fragmented map that has taken the grizzly bear population in the whole region into this fragmented, cracked windshield. And those, you know, those cuts add up, hard to undo them. So at what point, and the other thing I'd like to make a point of is that we spend a lot of time, I've got a whole network of people undoing fractures now. So I have to admit to a tad bit of frustration where I'm spending my whole life and tons of money, sometimes millions of dollars, on trying to undo the fragmentation. And then we come along and we just keep creating more of them. So we as we fix one, we make another. So anyway, that's just a little bit of my personal frustration, which I will not let out. Sorry about that.
So Michael, we have a question for you.
Okay.
Hi there, Michael. How are you?
Pretty good.
Good. Christopher Yates, West Kootenay Métis Society.
Okay.
I'm wondering if you've put any consideration into the local Indigenous people that are involved in this project and that that actually are consulting in this project to put in a wildlife corridor.
Yes, I have, and I work with I've been working very specifically with the Tanaha and the Shuswap band, but specifically the Tanaha came to me and asked me if I would share all my data and whatever I knew about the area, and I've given everything to them. And they've hired some people to do a multi-species look at things. So I'm cooperating with them in the same spirit, which I cooperate with pretty much anybody interested in this topic. So yes, that answer, you know, I'm working with them sort of closely. I've had 2 or 3 1-hour meetings with them, and I have another one next week about just that topic, as a matter of mainly just sharing my data and some insights on how to model it. They're trying to use ecological modeling to estimate these things. I do that for a living. So, you know, so yeah.
Thank you for your answer.
You bet.
Yeah, we do have one other question here on the chat line, Michael. Says, lots of data, love it. Can we open source this? Where will this be stored? What tools will you use so that others can interpret multiple factors accordingly? Smart regions across Canada are using open data standards.
Yeah, most of the things that I talked about today were published in the peer-reviewed literature, and they're available to the universe. And, you know, I provide data for anybody who asks. I don't know where they keep it. So it is sort of available. The paper, everything I said about huckleberries is, I'm right in the middle of a giant paper that I'm publishing that will then be open sourced. So it's all available to the universe to use as and anybody who asks me, I pretty much share it after I publish it, of course. But it's all available, and hopefully I've got the reviews back on the huckleberry paper, and all that stuff has all come through really good. It looks like it's going to go through. I'm just doing all the final touches, and then it will hopefully be available at some point in the future. So yes, everything I do is pretty much available.
We have one more question. Roughly how much habitat has been known, that just lost it, to have been, I think it was disturbed in the Kootenay region?
Well, that's a very good question, and I can't answer that right here in this thing. Right, it's not so much how much habitat has been disturbed in the region, because you got to define how much disturbance. What does that mean? How much has been logged? How much has been settled? How much has a people on it? How much has had roads on it? Let me say this: that I do specialize in gathering the data of human disturbance in the area, and pretty much everything that's not protected has got higher road densities by a factor of 2, sometimes 3 higher than what are generally sustainable for grizzly bears. So we're kind of we're really over-roaded in that regard, but there are plenty of areas sometimes that don't have too many roads in it. We're also blessed, although I'm a complete atheist, sorry. We're also lucky to have a lot of high, decent percentage, not quite enough of protected areas. So there is a lot of undisturbed habitat, but also it's not so much the quantity, but it's also where they're disturbed. And probably the thing that my work has highlighted is humans live for very good reason in the lower valleys between the mountains, and that has ended up fragmenting a lot of the nature in our area. And the whole response, one of the biggest responses that nature needs to make to climate change is to be able to adapt and move and shift. This means species, this means ecological processes, and this means ecosystems and habitat types and functions. And that the location of the disturbance of humans, which is a very high percentage in the valleys, has a bigger punch than its weight, than its area, if you get my sense of it. So where that disturbance is has a bigger impact. So it's a very good question, but it's a very complex one to answer. Hopefully I've touched on a few of the aspects that might come into play.
There's one more question here. Do you have any information, any data on impact to mountain goats?
Well, I do, and I almost presented it, and I didn't because it was just a little too vague for my liking. Mountain goats are pretty important in this area, and they do need to disperse between mountains like everybody else. And their habitats are centered in the higher rugged elevations, somewhat similar to grizzly bears and wolverine. And if somebody put a gun to my head and said where would they probably have a similar corridor function in areas as grizzly bear and wolverine, particularly because they're sort of high elevation, more rugged species. But I don't have really good enough data to say it, so I left it out. So I appreciate the question and trying to lure me into that corner. So thank you.
Okay, I think, one more question.
Hi, I'm a local. My name is Liz, and I've lived here for almost 4 decades. I spent many years in those in the mountains between New Denver and Kaslo. And I used to be an avid skier and hiker, and that was impact enough. And today I feel the same way. Somebody wants to go skiing, there's nothing wrong with driving up there, parking your car, strapping your skis on, and away you go. And you can spend a whole day without chairlifts, without restaurants, without any of the amenities that come with tourism. As far as disturbances, our region has been disturbed radically by mining 100 years ago. And I mean, these mountains were empty, devoid of trees, and they dug into the mountains for the silver, for the ore. And there is still some mining going on here. Now, if we put up a resort, I've never seen mountain goats here in all the years I've been trucking in those mountains. But I have seen grizzlies, and I have seen lots of black bear. And every year there's one family of moose. The region up near Zincton can sustain one family of moose. And if we put in some jumbo resort that people are going to pay thousands of dollars to come to, Are they going to care that a moose has been displaced? I mean, as far as I'm concerned, between Kaslo and New Denver already is a corridor, and I'm very much against this proposed development. Just my opinion.
Okay, there wasn't a question there, but I will say that was a really cute moose family too. Last year, I think we all saw the two yearling guys hanging out there, but there are plenty of mountain goats. I've seen a ton of them out there. If you go up Whitewater and just stare up into the cliffs, you'll find mountain goats and up Lyle Creeks. But yeah, appreciate your comments. No, there wasn't a question, so maybe I'm off the hook here.
I guess the only thing that I might add to finish up here is we do know, Michael, that the Whitewater drainage is a very important grizzly viewing area. It's very popular. It's currently a draw for tourists who hike up there to view grizzlies. Is there an irony here? Are we going to potentially lose that grizzly viewing area if this development goes ahead?
If that's a question, I'm going to go out on a limb. It always takes somebody maybe who's a little slightly older than me to drag me into a dark corner. But I included that idea in my letter to the province. I left it out of this talk. But yeah, I think that, I mean, if you're forcing me for a public, a non-scientific opinion here, I think that that's at very high risk, and it probably that's an irony. Yeah, I just, I was here and used to hike up it before they built a trail on the safe side of that valley. And I used to walk right up the trail, right through the middle, like grizzly bear. We were crazy, but now it's a much safer thing. And there'll be a point at which we overrun that and the grizzly bears will move on. And that would be a bit of a shame. It's, yeah, that's a whole nother can of worms that didn't go into, but I think it should be part of the equation. They left it out of their corridor function and their maps, probably because I don't know why, but to me, that's you hit a sore point there, Colin. I'm with you.
Okay, well, if there are no more questions. Oh, questions are coming up over my shoulder. Are there any bears that are currently being monitored in the proposed Zincton area?
No, there's never been. The only direct science ever done in that area was the province a long time ago in 1996 did a DNA survey over the whole area. And that's the only work that's ever been done there. Nobody's ever radio collared bears. They just did a very thinly done, but decently done DNA survey. And I've used the results from that I've integrated that into my larger analyses to understand the area. So I did incorporate some local science about bear specific information into some of the things that I reported today, but nobody's doing that. The nice thing is we don't really need to study bears everywhere anymore. We've studied them a lot of places. We're doing very extensive DNA surveys and very extensive radio telemetry where I work, and we are now starting to see bear behavior, ecology, and conservation in color. We can just, what you really want to do is do what we do to all your children so you can find out what they do at university. We really can figure out what the bears are doing, when they're getting in trouble, why they're doing it. And so it's actually pretty cool. So we don't really need to study everything to death. We can make extrapolations from our adjacent area. The good news story in this is all my work is just right next door and very, very similar, if not identical ecosystems. So it's very applicable.
There's a question. Can you speak about the Whitewater drainage specifically there, Michael? We've touched on it, but I'm not sure what you could add.
Well, that is the crown jewel in that area for grizzly bears, but there's many of those. The back end of Rossiter Creek, which I've skied, and there's, a lot of those places are extremely wonderful. Lyle Valley, up the Lyle Lakes and all that. What they are is what I was trying to get at. They are, they are the best of the best in the sense that they have those thick huckleberry patches that make those bears fat and happy and pregnant in the to grow their kids. They are the spring habitat that makes them den near there and live there all year round. And that's what makes it such a perfect corridor. It's all I can say is it's sort of the crown jewel of that place. Pretty important in that regard. But the thing is here, any one valley doesn't matter that much. People are going to go, oh, what are you saying? It's really the larger picture that matters, the location of it in the sense of its relationship to the Habitat Peninsula south of the highway, that relationship into the end of the distribution of bears just south of there at the US border. Those are the bigger picture stories that matter. And so that's the bear story blows up bigger geographically. And then the bear story opens a window, and Whitewater takes us to that window of looking at the deeper ecology and to the other functions that are brought in by the ecological corridors, and all the species are out there. One or two species are not that important. It's the culmination of them. And we can't study all those species. So we pick out the ones that are kind of important. We pick out grizzly bears. We figure out what's going on. They're sensitive. We pick out western toads. So, just trying to me, it's a bigger story than the little valley itself, but the little valley itself is also important. So hopefully you can get me off the stage here, Colin.
Yeah, well, thank you. I was just about to add that your 10 minutes is up.
My 10 minutes is up. Okay,
okay, wait.
Michael, I was wondering if you could speak to the fact that part of this proposal is a community, a permanent village that would house between 1,350 and 1,750 people, depending on which version of the proposal you read, and what that effect might have. Thanks.
And I'd have to ask you to be as quick as you can, Michael, because our next speaker is 3 hours ahead of us, and I don't want him to fall asleep in his chair waiting for his turn. So please.
Appreciate your thing. I'll do it in 3 words. It's never good.
Okay, on those few words, Michael, I think we can extrapolate from there. Thank you very, very much for taking the time this evening to present, and perhaps we can touch base later about getting some of your data.
Okay.
Thank you. So we've heard extensively about the effects on wildlife from Michael Proctor. Our next speaker can perhaps talk about the effects on human life. Our next speaker is Dr. Sanjay Nepal, who is professor of geography and environmental management at the University of Waterloo and past president of the Canadian Geographers. I invited Dr. Nepal specifically because if you do even cursory research into this subject, a paper comes up called Resort-Induced Changes in Small Mountain Communities in British Columbia. I couldn't believe my eyes when I saw that appear on the screen. So I'm going to leave that there and ask Dr. Nepal to address the socio-economic and perhaps the cultural impacts of this proposal. Dr. Nepal, thank you very much.
Thank you, Mayor Ferguson. Good evening, and it's nice to be with all of you. Now, can I share my slides as well, similar to the previous speaker?
Yeah, Michael, did you give me back the presentation rights?
It wasn't up to me, it's up to the host, but I
Here we
think
go.
you should do it. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
So Michael's kept a screen. So
Michael, did you make me the host again? Because I don't have it right now.
I'm not sharing.
No, but I had to make you host so you could share.
Yeah, or make him co-host. If you make Sanjay co-host.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I don't have that option right now because I'm no longer the host. You are.
Okay, Well, then doggone it, I'll go do that.
Okay, thank you.
My IT person is rushing towards me right now. Corey.
I don't know that we're gonna be able to sell this.
Thanks, Corey.
Yeah, go,
Up here,
okay, no, I think it's down here. It says
but
share.
what?
Right here, share.
No, I think it's
Right next to it.
participants. And
When I try to share, it's
I gotta find him. Let me find
It's right at the
Sanjay.
top.
Yeah.
We'll call him. Just give it back to Colin.
I'm gonna give it back to Colin or Sanjay right here.
Okay. Oh, that's Village of
Make
Silverton.
host.
So that's Village of Silverton. You're okay with that?
That's Sanjay, right?
No, you've clicked the wrong one.
No, I think I got the right one.
Okay.
Okay, I just made the village of the host. Okay, sorry. I want to know, I grabbed the wrong one. My wife is always right, in case anyone's wondering.
Make host. There you go.
So the drinks cart will be coming around shortly.
Okay. Sanjay.
I'll take a beer.
Okay, that should work.
So am I good to go?
You should be able to share now.
Should be it.
Okay, let's see. Hmm.
Okay, I'll speak louder, but Jason can maybe turn it up.
It's working, Sanjay, you're shared.
Okay, I'm just
my
trying
wife
to.
says.
Okay, can you see my screen?
Yeah, we can see your screen.
Okay, do I need to make it bigger than how it appears now?
All we
We
can
can-
see, we can see your list of files.
What about the screen?
That's the screen with your list of files.
You're hovering around a PDF. The screen, I think, the file I think you want is just under there where it says Mountain Resorts and Small Towns, Microsoft PowerPoint. It's just the next one down. If you can
Yeah.
click on that, I think we'll be good.
Let me just do it one more time.
As soon as you open it up, Sanjay, and then click share, it'll come up. You've already sharing the screen, but you just need to click on the file as if it was, you were just looking at it on your desktop.
Okay, it's telling me I'm sharing it now.
Yeah, but the PowerPoint's not open.
This is a PDF file. It's not a PowerPoint.
Okay, well, the
That's
PDF
okay.
file's not open.
Okay.
When you open that PDF file, you should see a number of documents on your desktop screen.
Right.
And just click on the PDF file and that'll take over this list that you've got.
How about now?
Yes, bingo.
Does it work?
Yep.
Okay, so that's good. So thank you again. Thank you for your patience. Maybe what I'll do is mine is not going to be as elaborate and as detailed as Michael Proctor's. So I'm going to just pick on a few things that I think might be important for your audience to know. What I would also say is, BC has been, the Lower Mainland in particular, has been a focus for all kinds of resort development. So if you go around the Lower Mainland, BC, you'll find and talk to people around, talk to mayors of small towns, mayors of Golden, Fernie and Valemount and places like that, you will have a ton of wealth of experience, collectively. So perhaps that may be a way to start, looking at what's happening around the province as well as in Alberta, and then maybe go from there. So that's my my first piece of advice. The second one is I was really surprised when Mayor Ferguson contacted me, because I had published that paper almost 10, 11 years ago. And, you know, with academics, we publish one paper, and then we move on to the second. And you know, over time, you tend to forget about what you have published. But so in that sense, I was surprised, but I was also not surprised, because this is an issue that's been going on for a long time. You know, I've been doing tourism research for about 30 years in a variety of locations, you know, both here in BC as well as in Canada, in Ontario. I'm from Nepal, so a lot of work in Nepal, and some work in China. So overall, you know, I've done a lot of work on tourism, mountain tourism, sustainable tourism issues, and I was in the process. So what I'm going to do here is just, you know, bring you back to, first I'll take you outside of BC. I'll take you to a place, as you can see here in my slide. It's a resort. It's a newly developed resort out west of, you know, you may call it the periphery of the peripheries, right? Really, really far away. It's just a small little town. Slowly, because of its rich amenity values, you know, high quality nature, and you know, aesthetics and so on, has attracted a lot of tourists, and some of them are new tourists. So in that process, you know, sleepy little towns turn into resort towns. You know, a community of 100 people, 100 residents, 150 residents, you know, 1,000 residents morph to become fairly large. You know, some geographers call it a micropolitan development. You know, you know, they morph, they become bigger and bigger, to the point that things go out of control. So this photo from Northwest China that I have in front of you, it's to suggest that it's not just a BC phenomenon. It's not just a North American phenomenon. It's a global phenomenon, right? And it's been thought out, the process of developing resorts, planning resorts, developing resorts, and looking at tourism as a way out of stagnant economies and things like that, and have been thought out in some very unexpected places. And that's how I was brought, I think, to China. So this is a photo from Northwest China in the Xinjiang province. And as you can see, the photo here, nice mountains. There's some places here in this area. There's a fairly large UNESCO World Heritage Site, and some of the landscape looks very similar to what you see here in Canada, especially in the Pacific Northwest. So you have a resort, and resort brings a lot of people, but resort also brings a lot of developments, as you can see here, some fancy homes being built, and it becomes, you know, it attracts a large crowd over time, and you know, and then all of a sudden you realize the whole characteristics of the town, but not only its geographic characteristics, its economic characteristics, but also its you know, social and cultural characteristics completely change, right? So that's been the global trend, and you know, BC is currently in focus for a variety of reasons. So this is just a photo of, you know, sleepy little towns, as I said earlier, turning into a resort. And to think of a resort in this very dry place, even, you know, from a snow point of view, it's somewhat unusual, I would say, you know. And not just here, I've also been invited to other places in China where, you know, there's the snow reliability is in question, and yet the governments there are planning to move forward with resort development. right? So that's the context and the background. What I wanted to do here is just give you a small, a slide that kind of summarizes some of the resort-related impacts on the economy, on the environment, on the social side of things, which I've just to a certain extent, I have explained that in that paper. So basically, it morphs into a transnational space, meaning people from everywhere. A really good example of a transnational space in BC would be Whistler, right? Whistler is the resort municipality of Whistler. Lots of people, lots of outsiders, and that creates a lot of opportunities, but also creates a lot of tensions, right? Oftentimes, the resort operates as a segregated economy, meaning it's an exclusive economy. It's often is developed as an exclave, right? And sometimes that it's not really good for local communities, especially smaller communities like the one that you are located in. It also creates this sense of inflated economy. It tends to be very capital intensive. And one thing that really struck me when I reviewed some of the documents, especially by the proponents seem to call it not mountain resort, but rather they would prefer to call it ecotourism. And I can tell you it's not ecotourism they are talking about, right? It is that capital intensive, technology aided, technology enabled kind of a development, right? So as I said, it turns into a small town or a community into this micropolitan type of development. And on the environment side, Michael Proctor gave an excellent presentation, so I don't really need to talk about that, even though my background is also in human dimensions of conservation. So I've done some work on wildlife and human conflicts and things like that. But there's all kinds of environmental uncertainties, climatic influences, climate change, global warming looms large. So we need to think of these tourism projects from that perspective as well. So I have always said, tourism is a double-edged sword. There are lots of economic opportunities if you do it right. But if you do not do it right, there can also be tremendous, negative implications of that tourism. On the social side, once you have a resort, as someone was, I think it was Michael who was saying, 1,500 people, perhaps, I don't know how many people will be there as a result of that resort, but that's going to add even more, because not only you'll have people interested in ski tourism and resort tourism, but you'll also have people who will be attracted to these places because of the rich amenity values. So you might have outsiders coming for outdoor recreation, that backcountry recreation activities and so on. So in the process, you might end up having class of values. Kimberly is a very good place to understand some of those conflicting values between the traditionalists and the so-called modern people with a modern outlook. You might have host-guest conflicts. You might even have conflicts between various user groups. So do not think that the ski resort is just only for the ski resort people. It is also for others. So that then creates this whole new dimension of of conflicts between many different interested parties. The most important to me is this idea that resorts, oftentimes behind resort, and I'm not against resort. I've been to resort. I've traveled to many other places, but I'm also I want the resort development to be done right. So oftentimes resort is a proxy. Resort is a process to get to what in some places the true intention is really second homes and expensive homes. It's not just second homes, it's expensive homes. So that's kind of a broad overview, and I have a few photos that I will just share it again. During the course of my research in BC, and I forgot to mention that I started my teaching. I was an assistant professor at UNBC in 22 years ago. Right, so I have very fond memories of my time spent in these small villages, small towns. I did have a a backcountry recreation research project in Mount Robson. So I am in some ways, even though I am here right now in Ontario, but I have always considered myself as part of the part of BC, and BC is it's almost like home to me because of the mountains. Right, I'm from Kathmandu. So to me, places in BC, and in the Canadian Rockies are I've a lot more commonalities. I think I've lot more common things that I can that I feel about BC than I feel about Ontario in some ways. So what I'm going to do next is just some points in again, these should be fairly similar. You should be familiar to these places. So I call this ground realities. Right here, you have a photo of a condominium in Canmore, right, built and marketed exclusively for out-of-towners, because for locals it becomes unaffordable. Right. In the process of building resorts, locals may end up being displaced. And this is not just the case in mountain resorts, but also the case in many amenity-rich towns. For example, here in Ontario, we have the Blue Mountains, where people go to ski. It's it's a very small mountain, but nevertheless, it's in close proximity to Toronto, and as such gets a lot of traffic, a lot of visitors. And over time, Collingwood has become a noisy place, right? So that's one of the ground realities. It's the character of the home, the living environment changes. Look at the other ground realities. Again, these $1 million homes in Canmore. So resorts turn their homes into real estate properties, right? And some of these homes are quite expensive. So when I was in Canmore, this is way back 10, 11 years ago, these houses were were on the market for $2.5 million. I can imagine they would be now twice that amount. Right, so it's not really for the average Joe, and many are second homes, partly because these mountains, this is really the playgrounds for the rich and the famous, right? And then you also have resort tourism that has a large ecological footprint. This is a photo from Golden, for example. You look at the lifts there, a nice fancy restaurant on top of the hill. By the way, I had a very expensive lunch at that restaurant, much more expensive than I would have, in, let's say, in big cities, expensive cities like Vancouver. So in some ways, these are ecological footprints. Capital, technology intensive, costs a lot of money to operate sustainably. So again, we need to think how these types of operations can be sustainable from a local standpoint. The second, so here's another ground reality, which is resorts in most cases exclude local communities. Now, I don't know what the plans are for, Silverton, places like New Denver, Kaslo, but if the resorts get built and they become exclaves, and they're not integrated into the community, I'm afraid not many local communities would would benefit from that type of development. Like, so here in Fernie, for example, the old town is quite a distance from where the resort is. So the resort And when you go to these resorts, for example, in Golden, I was in Golden, it's a self-contained village, fancy wines that you can buy from all over the world, and how is that going to support the local economy? Right. So something to think about. What is the local, what is the production base, and how can you tie these types of economic activities locally? How can you ground these locally? I think that's something that needs to be considered. Let's look at another one. Tourism becomes the focus of development, driven by external capital and leisure preferences of outsiders. And whether you like it or not, that's what you will end up with if the scale of development, once you let it, once the resort development becomes a reality, once the resort gets built, this may not happen immediately, but this will happen eventually. So again, as local residents, you will have to be very proactive, very vigilant about not only the type of development, but also the characteristics of development, looking at how the developer is, what's the developer's relationship with the local residents, and so on. So it promotes this idea of enclave tourism, a form of tourism that is not locally grounded, and it doesn't have any link to local economic base, right? So some of these issues may not be relevant to where you are located, but it is relevant to many other places where there could be a viable a local production base that sometimes gets overlooked. Okay. It creates a divide between tourists in resort towns and old timers in old towns. I think of Golden as an example. So that's the photo of Golden, the old town of Golden, and then the resort in Golden. It's almost 19 kilometers. That's the distance between these two, right? So the resort has evolved as an exclusive place, even though it's in Golden, it's part of Golden, from many perspectives, but yet it is an isolated entity, and you don't want that to happen in your community. It displaces longtime residents who, they will get attractive offers, they may end up selling their house, move to cheaper locations and things like that. So that's just a natural course that will happen over time, right? This may not happen instantly, but it will happen. Okay. Resort, and here's the positive. Resort creates demand for new products and experiences sought by out-of-towners and second homeowners. So again, it creates opportunities. There's no doubt about that. But what kinds of opportunities, how local communities are going to be benefited from these types of operations, that's pretty much dependent on how this engagement with the developer, negotiation, facilitation, all of that, those things will occur. And to what extent the local residents can have a say on the type of development that goes on in these places. So here's my last slide, where I want to just say what can be done. Learning lessons from the BC example, but also learning lessons from many other international examples. One is this idea of integrated development, meaning I think I would rather see the village, these towns as part of that integrated development, where they're active partners in the development, in the planning, in solving problems, in making sure that the benefits are realized, or the benefits are maximized, and the negative impacts are minimized, right? So that's how I would rather like to see happening. In terms of I think this is a very good event that you have organized. So this is a good place to start this proactive dialogue, this multi-stakeholder collaboration, continuous engagement with developers on a variety of issues, documentation of local needs. For example, that presentation that Michael Proctor gave, an excellent example of issues that sometimes may be overlooked or may be forgotten in the process of getting too excited about the economic prospects of development, right? So monitoring growth and development, you also need to, small towns do not have a lot of capacity to monitor this growth and development. So that's something that needs to be thought well. A big issue, this very well in BC, I don't have to tell you, affordable housing policies, no matter how small, small the towns are, that's eventually, it will creep up, right, to your place. That it's eventually you'll be in a very similar situation that Whistler was, a long time ago, right? And really developing collaborative linkages and networking. And I opened my presentation by saying that perhaps there could be a collective learning and sharing experience between mayors and town folks from many communities where these things are happening, right? And in the end, I think it's really about you want a good developer. You want a developer with conscience, a mindful, responsible, not only for environmental stewardship, but also economic and social stewardship, right? So, so if you feel like the proponents are, if they are socially, environmentally responsible, or at least if they exhibit any of those characteristics, I think that would be a good start. Yeah, and you basically need to plan for uncertain futures. Economic downturn is, and I did my initial study was done in Belmont. This was in 2006, 2007. I actually ran with my students, ran a town hall meeting where there's mixed emotions about big resorts coming to small, towns like Belmont. But people were excited about some of the economic prospects, but then the recession happened, and some of these aspirations had to be people had to just they were not able to turn some of these projects into reality. Snow conditions, I don't know if you have given a lot of thought to it. Snow depth, snow reliability, that's going to be a major issue. IPCC is coming up with a new report around the end of this year, 2022, I believe, sometime in fall, with the assumption that there will be a likelihood of 1.5 degrees Celsius warming, at least, that's the minimum that they're looking at. So given that, are you going to ease your community in 20 years down the road? Are you going to be similar to some of these New England resort communities where there's no snow? All the resort related developments have become stagnant. And this is, and I've done in my review of resorts, ski resorts, I've looked at I've read some of the papers that came out from Switzerland. Some of the lower altitude resorts had to be, either had to be closed, shut down completely, or had to rely on artificial snow. So those things are real. There's a recent article in New York Times about how some of the New England communities, this was in Vermont, how they are coping with some of these issues around resorts and the viability of resort-induced developments in the long run. So these are some real issues to talk about, and I don't have many other. So this is my last slide, and I really thank you for inviting me to this town hall, to this meeting, to this event, and and I'll be I'll say if I can be of any help, you can count me in. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Nepal, for that extensive presentation. I've been taking copious notes, and there's a lot to think about here, about the social and the cultural aspects. You may be interested to know that from the very beginning, we've been trying to create some kind of coalition of the communities so that we can get a foot in the door, if you like, at the planning stage. I know from personal experience somewhere else that if you can get a foot in the door at the very beginning, you can have more influence so that the aspirations of the local communities are taken into account. So this has been absolutely wonderful. Thank you very much, and especially for taking this part of your Friday evening. I know it's going on for, well, what time is it now? Way after 9 o'clock for you. Yeah, so
that's okay. I don't mind.
Thank you very much. Now I don't know if is our last presenter still with us? Oh, we have a question. I'm sorry, beg your pardon.
Mountain Resort Branch has the power over our municipalities. They have the power over the resorts, and they give broad sweeping powers to the people that they lease the land to. So then it's almost like ownership when they lease the land out for a resort. It's a lease, but with the powers they have, it's like ownership. So I'm wondering, when you look at Fernie, you look at any of the resorts, Golden, Revelstoke, do you know of any of these resort towns where the local community actually had any power to have effective input? I mean, if we want only low impact development, we've already lost that if the resort is approved. And then how are we to have power over what happens with that resort? I think when we look at many of these towns, we're going to be powerless once that resort has been approved and is being built.
So is there a specific question you'd like Dr. Nepal to address?
Well, my question is whether you know of any of the ski resort communities in BC where the local communities actually had effective input into what happens there.
Well, now since I no longer live in BC and I haven't really kept up with some of the more recent developments, I'm not able to tell you that, but I know of living in BC and some of my early engagements, there were some avenues for effective civic engagement in resort tourism. even to a certain extent, I think Golden had a fairly proactive mayor. I would say, again, it's not the case of um, ski resorts, but Canmore, the planning staff in Canmore were quite proactive. They were ahead of the game in many regards. So they were quite effective in bringing people together and engaging in these types of dialogues and making sure that these resort induced developments are going to be beneficial for not just for the resort developers but also for the entire community. And I see some of the responses coming up here, like yes, Revelstoke is now using a civic engagement platform. So Whistler has a long history, and again, so there are examples, and again, what I'm suggesting is for you actually don't really need to bring an outside expert like me. There's already a wealth of collective experience among experts, planners, mayors, other subject matter experts in BC, especially in the lower mainland. So I think if you plan it well, you could initiate something like that in your town too. So but definitely, that's the starting point. How do you engage the developer into this process, this planning dialogue process? I think that's going to be the key to making positive impacts.
But if you look at these resorts that you named, Canmore, Revelstoke, Golden, despite whatever community input they had, what careful planning they had, the resort development still went according to the basic problems of local residents getting driven out of town, high expensive second home development, eventual destruction of the environmental values that made people want to live there. They all went by that pattern, regardless of what input the local communities had.
Yeah, all I can say, unfortunately, that is the case in the vast majority of cases, not just in Canada, in North America in general. If you look at what's happening in Colorado, but it's the same thing. Even in Asia, in New Zealand, for example, that's the case. And so again, small towns are, I would say, a bit powerless in that regard. But collectively, perhaps you can. You might be able to convince the developers that perhaps they need to rethink. We can still have. I think we can still have resort development, but development that is more or less. That puts the interests of the local communities at the center of their the activity. So it is possible. So it's I think it is possible. So it's even though it seems sometimes the big dollars, developers with powerful connections and big money seem to be all too powerful. But sometimes, if the local communities are, quite active, proactive, and are willing to engage in this, this process, I think you could develop, some of these projects could take into account the concerns of the local community. So yes, maybe I should have paraphrased that it's not, local communities are not completely powerless. They are. But what I'm saying is, in the vast majority of cases that I've seen, that seems to be the trend.
Thank
We have
you,
one more.
and,
I'm sorry.
Thank the Village of Silverton for inviting you here.
We have another question.
Yeah, Sanjay.
Yeah.
First of all, I'm from Fernie.
Oh, okay.
And Deloitte just came out with a report 2 weeks ago that 80% of the economy in Fernie is from the mining.
Mm-hmm.
And leaves 20% for the ski area and everything else in the town. It is not a resort town, which is also why I live there.
Okay.
And you should probably, talk to Ange and some other people there and see what's going on. And I'm wondering why you've basically taken the low hanging fruit of Whistler. You could throw in Aspen, Vale, and looked at them. And you haven't looked at the communities that have been community active. You could look at Discovery Basin in Montana.
Mm-hmm.
You could look at a place like Red Lodge. And both of those have been very, very inclusive of their community and have not gone through the sort of massive development that Whistler has. I'm
Right.
wondering why you would come to a group like this that is a small community and is similar to something like Phillipsburg and the area around Discovery Basin, and you haven't done any research in that sort of way.
Right. You know what? Fair point. I would say. I think there's a really good. I'm glad that you brought up some of these examples. There's a really good book that came out in the early, late 90s, where it's the book was focused on balancing nature and commerce in gateway communities. Excellent book. I don't have the title now, but it's somewhere in my reference. But that book,
Hal Clifford wrote it.
oh,
It's
yes,
called The
yes,
Downhill
yes.
Slide.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No,
And
not
out
that
of-
one.
and-
Not
not
that one. Not
But
that one.
that was not a balance. But are you familiar with the NAR Institute out of University of Utah?
Yeah.
And they've been doing some very interesting work in how
Right.
you balance community and how you get community involved in development.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And that would be again a counterbalance to sort of the what's going on in Whistler. Although
Right,
Whistler's
right.
played a big part in it.
Right. No, my point was that you can look at some of these examples, the small town examples, and my main point here was to convey the message that resorts could go wrong, right? Resorts could go wrong.
Why don't you talk about how resorts can go well? I mean, taking it, it's like not everything is on fire. Sometimes you can
Right.
create something that's positive. Like
Right.
Phillipsburg you go there on a weekday and it's full of yellow buses from all over Montana.
Right.
I mean,
So
let's what would really help in this situation is to come into this and come up with a positive way to go forward that would benefit the community and would not create a lot of fear, which is what you're doing.
I'm sorry. That was not my intention. It was not my intention to create. I've been doing tourism research for more than almost 30 years, and I've always said tourism has the great power to change economic prospects, but it also has. It also brings a lot of risk. So I would say my own perspective is much more balanced than how I have appeared in this at this event. And you're right. You can look at some good examples. You can look at some
So
not so good examples.
what are good
So
examples?
if
that you
I
would
wonder
bring
if
up?
I could just interrupt at this point, because I don't think we have time to
Okay.
go deeply into this. I think your point is really well taken. The only thing I would like to say is that that it was not the intention of this evening to argue pros and cons.
No, I'm not arguing pros and
Yeah,
cons.
and
I'm saying that
and
there
the-
are ways.
and the position that
Yeah.
Silverton has taken from the beginning is that the village council is neutral. But what we do want to know is about the dangers. You know, it's kind of like, and this is a very bad example. If your house is on fire, you don't say, oh, well, it may not be a very big fire. So I think the way that we're approaching it is there are so many examples that have gone off the rails that we want to bring this into the discussion so that we can have a balanced approach. And actually Silverton
Did
Council
you
on several
listen to the
occasions.
previous person?
And,
What
on-
she just said was that there isn't a lot that a local government can do about it. And that is true in the permitting process. You guys don't have a lot to say. So what you kind of need to do is figure out a way to become involved and
Which
make
is-
it work to your benefit.
which is exactly what we're trying to do. And that's what we've said from the very beginning, is that we want to have a stake in the beginning of this so that we can have some involvement.
So how are you going to do that?
Well, we're still working on it. We're still working to build a coalition. And the RDCK, in fact, has taken a position where they have recognized that there can be some economic advantage, but they are wary of the details. And basically, that's what we're saying. The devil is in the details. So I agree with you completely.
The devil's in building a coalition. I mean, my experience in the ski industry is I lived in Aspen in 1969.
You know,
And I've been here, I've been there, I've been in it ever since then.
I would
And,
very
yeah.
much like to meet with you afterwards and,
Okay,
and,
we
and
will.
hear about your
Okay.
experiences.
Good.
Yeah. Yes, if you can contact me through the village office. Thank you. Now, we had one more question here, which we'll take, which was, I think, a good one. So Sanjay, do you have any data on the survival of the survival rates of established businesses?
Oh, okay. So I don't have that. But there are resorts. And again, these are resorts to answer the question that the previous gentleman asked. There are, and again, I do not want to appear that I'm against the resorts, any resorts, right? That's not my intention at all, right? Because I have been to many, I've been to places where we looked at the prospects of good, sustainable mountain resort development that has local benefits, local interests at the center of the project. If you do it that way, you can have a good resort plan. If you don't do it that way, you might end up having a situation where you have a resort that's very capital technology intensive, doesn't really take into account local concerns and local perspectives. So that was my intention. I do not have any open data sources. I'll have to. I can provide that a specific answer. I will have to go and look, do some research on my part to come up with some of the more sustainable resorts. But that book that I just mentioned, it's an old book, Balancing Nature and Commerce in Gateway Communities, is a lot about ski towns, small towns. Really a good book. Has a lot of good examples of how to do resorts right. So that's a book that I would highly recommend for people in small towns and communities.
Thank you. I think it's probably only fair if I foreground some of my own kind of personal experience, because I am actually a refugee from Canmore. I lived through 28 years of development there. So I know what can happen, and I've seen people involved in struggles to maintain a sense of community, a sense of place, and it can be very difficult. So that's part of my interest in this too. Having said that, I am not against this development, but I do understand, I think, at a very visceral level that is very important for the local people to understand and to get involved and to try and, I guess, preserve their aspirations from the very beginning. So I think that's the end of the questions, and I would like to thank you very much for for staying so late and for being involved. Thank you. When we planned this evening, we really had no idea how it would go, and we had no idea how many people would attend. So we have been flying a bit by the seat of our pants. So I'm addressing this specifically to the ever patient Jay Buttle, who is waiting to do a presentation. Like our other presenters this evening, he is an independent. He's an economist. He is not associated with any organization. I'm going to offer him the floor so that he can give us his presentation. Thank you, Jay.
Thank you, Colin. And I'll do my best to keep this incredibly short. As Colin mentioned, I'm not here in any professional capacity, and I've not been studying this issue in any depth. I was asked to come and speak to this following on the heels of a conversation that I had with a fellow who was looking into this issue locally, and I had mentioned a couple of economic concepts and economic concerns that I had with some of the plans that I had seen, and was asked to speak to that and then invited to this. So I'll be fairly brief. I'll just quickly tell you a moment of my background, why I have any business speaking about this at all, which is limited. I've been an economist for about 22 years. I've worked with the federal government, with the provincial government. I've worked at Selkirk College, worked with the Columbia Basin Research Rural Development Institute. I've worked on big forestry projects, worked with Environment Canada in the climate change shop doing economic evaluation. And through some of the work that I've done regionally, worked with the business retention and expansion program. And the reason I mention that is there was a woman who was asking about the business success rate and whether or not there's data available for some of the communities. And the chambers of commerce and the economic development officers in a lot of the different communities throughout the basin will have some data on that. And those communities that have been collecting BRE data for some 10 plus years now may well have some decent data for you on that. I want to bring up a couple of concerns that I noticed while reading through and speaking to some local folks, and one of the main ones, I spoke to a lot of folks locally who are very much in favor of the resort, and one of the resounding messages that I hear from people is jobs, 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 and we need some hope for the youth in town, and I need some opportunities for people to go and work. And I certainly agree with that. I certainly see plenty of missed opportunities for youth in the area in terms of developing their careers. What I do question, though, is the quality and the pay structures associated with resort jobs. And again, I'm not researching this. I don't have a tremendous amount of data at my fingertips, but I've certainly worked in plenty of resorts, and I've seen seen plenty of work situations in resort towns where there are a huge number of jobs, but they tend to be fairly low-paying jobs. And if we couple that with some of the real estate trends that Sanjay pointed out, and that we've seen evidence for with raising real estate prices, that makes me wonder whether or not those job opportunities are setting people up for a little bit more pain in the future. One of the other pieces of data that is available through the BC Real Estate Foundation Association, pardon me, it is possible to extract the purchase trends. And one of the relevant trends that I saw through my work with the RDI was the cities of Invermere and Windermere seeing somewhere in the order of 90 to 95% of all new real estate sales being out of province buyers. and a lot of that being attributed to the growth of the resorts in that town. Now, obviously, we're not subject to the same characteristics and constraints and pressures that Invermere and Windermere are. But just to point out that some of those trends and pressures can be quite severe, and I'm happy to hear people bringing up these issues, and the last speaker's suggestion that we look for very positive ways to deal with this. And I think the Colin and the councils are very wise to look at what these issues are so that they can start addressing those specifically. I also heard Miranda mention in the chat room that it's a hard time finding doctors that'll move to the community because of that lack of housing. And gosh, if the doctors are having a hard time finding housing, then I can't imagine what it would be like for the youth. One other thing that I found in my research is the tourism industry can be a very good driver of jobs for locals, but you see ownership trends that tend to be outside of the region, and then you've got most of the profit streams leaving the region, which would be called economic leakage. And while this project does have a local proponent, I understand that it's going to be structured with some outside money coming in to purchase up a lot of the capital and a lot of the development money. As Sanjay was mentioning, these resorts tend to be fairly capital intensive. Now, this is a fairly low intensity resort, but all the same, getting any lift service in there is going to be rather expensive, and that money is likely to come from outside the region, which sets up a stream of revenues leaving the area. One other point that Sanjay brought up was about climate change projections for the interior region. And the last set of projections that I saw were showing something in the order of 1.5 to 2.5 degrees warming, focused in the winter months. And this resort is sitting with a top elevation somewhere in the neighborhood of 6,500 to 7,000 feet, which is not tremendously high. And certainly I haven't seen anything addressing that within the business plan or any of the work that's been done to date. And the one last point I'd like to bring up is with respect to cost benefit analysis. And this project being involved with public land would certainly benefit from having some cost benefit analysis style work applied to it. One of the big practices there is the practice of discounting future revenue streams, particularly with the money that's projected to go into the local development funds. I can't remember the name of what it was in that report, but there was some $13 million outlined to be directed towards the local communities, but that was undiscounted and grossly overstates the impact that would have to the region. And with respect to the environmental impacts that Michael was bringing up earlier, there are a number of ways that cost benefit analysis can bring some of that valuation into the discussion. And there's an environmental valuation reference inventory hosted by Environment Canada. It can be a very useful tool for applying valuation methods to environmental impacts. And that might be a nice system that would start bringing those concerns into the formal discussion, and perhaps even spur some creative ways to work around them or to offset them. And I'll leave it right there, trying to keep this to 7 o'clock. We're on the nose, or getting close to the time there. And that's about all I've got to say for the moment. So thank you, Colin. Thank you, everybody.
Sorry, Jay, there's one question that has come in here. This is not a resort owned by one wealthy corporation, but potentially hundreds of entrepreneurs, a village of new economy workers bringing in remote jobs and much needed dollars to work with locals and entrepreneurs. This is not pure tourism industry. What are your thoughts on this? Gosh.
Sorry, I muted myself there. My thoughts are, sorry, was someone else speaking there? My thoughts on that are that if that this is a composition issue that people should be thinking about, and if the composition of the development proves to be a lot of local people, then that starts to diminish the leakage issues. My point would be that it needs to be concerned. It needs to be a concern that that people address and think about.
I don't see any more specific questions to the economics. So I think we're done with questions. So thank you very much, Jay, for this. This has been really valuable, and I might contact you later about a couple of the points that you raised. So if there are no further questions, I think our post question answer period is a moot point. So I'd like to thank everyone involved for coming this evening, especially our presenters. And at that point, I think we will adjourn the meeting. Thank you. Oh, we have one question.
A question, Mr. Mayor. I contacted you last November to ask for consultation, being an Indigenous community that lives in the area and is of the area. So you reached out back in December to me and said that you would reach back out to my community in the last week of January. You did not. We're still waiting to hear from you. So you're talking down. You're speaking down about something that economically impacts my community and my people directly. There's other Indigenous nations as well that are at the table that the negative talk will have economic impacts on. So my question to you, sir, is when are you going to reach out to us?
Hello, but we can't hear Colin at this end online.
Yeah, so again, I apologize. I did send you an email today. This was a last minute event that was called. So we've been very busy with day-to-day issues in the village, and we haven't given any attention to this. It became obvious very recently that we had to do something, as we had to get some comments in, but we haven't finished gathering information. So we'd be very pleased to meet with you. We're not done by any means.
Well, thank you for that, because my community has been actively involved. We want to put in and help with the corridor. We want to actually have Indigenous people come so we can plant in that corridor. So it's something we've done for thousands of years, that we actually plant the corridors that we want the animals to come into. So we've been in consultation with the developer for months and months and months, over a year now. And there's several of us Indigenous communities that have been. So it's not just one Indigenous community, being like the first speaker talked to, that he consulted one community. There's 6 of us here and 90,000 Métis people across British Columbia.
Well, we'd be very happy to hear from you if you'd like to.
I would love to
talk after the event. We'll we can get together.
Sure.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for coming. I think that is the end of the evening. Do we have a question? Do we?
I don't.
No?
I was just about to make a point of order, if that's all.
Oh, okay.
It's been dealt with. Thank you.